Marcos and Luisa, a black couple in their early 30s, lived a quiet life in a rural town. They always dreamed of expanding their family, but after a few failed attempts to get pregnant, they decided that adoption would be the right way to bring the love of a child into the home. They already had a 7-year-old son, Jorge, who couldn't wait to have a little sister. After months of preparation, the couple was surprised to receive a call from social services. There was a white baby, Clara, just a few months old, waiting for a family. Although the surprise was great, Marcos and Luisa never hesitated to accept it. For them, skin color was never a question, and the love they felt for little Clara was instantaneous. However, when they took the baby home, they began to realize that, for the world around them, that adoption caused strangeness. On the first family outings, looks of curiosity and judgment became constant, and indiscreet questions began to arise from all sides. "Is she really your daughter?" was a question I often heard when I went out with Clara on my lap. Luisa, always with a gentle smile, replied firmly, "Yes, she is our daughter," with great pride. She knew that society still had a lot to learn about what truly defined a family. The love, responsibility, and care they dedicated to Clara were as genuine as what they had for Jorge. For them, skin color was never the factor that determined the love between parents and children, but rather the emotional bond and commitment to care for and protect that defenseless child who was now part of their lives. As the years passed, Clara grew up surrounded by affection and understanding. She knew her family was different from many others, but she never felt that was a negative thing. His brother Jorge was his best friend and protector, and his parents were the pillars of his life. However, when Clara started attending school, the children, often without a filter, asked questions that made her uncomfortable. "Why are you white and your parents are black?" It was a recurring question she faced, and Clara, still young, sometimes had difficulty answering. At home, Marcos and Luisa always talked to Clara about these situations, explaining to her that people sometimes have difficulty understanding what is different, but that this should never change what she knew in her heart. She was so part of that family as much as anyone else. Clara absorbed these conversations with maturity, but as time went by, the school's questions became more intense, and she began to question her own identity and what it meant to be the daughter of parents who, physically, were so different. As Clara grew up, family ties only grew stronger. The girl, now 7 years old, was curious and intelligent, always seeking to understand the world around her. The love she received from her parents and Jorge helped her face difficulties with confidence. Even so, a question began to grow in his mind. Where did I really come from? Although he felt completely part of the family, the mystery of his biological origins was still a shadow in his life. Marcos and Luisa knew that, sooner or later, this question would arise, but they were in no rush. They believed that the most important thing was for Clara to know that, regardless of her origin, their love for her was unconditional. When he turned 12, the desire to discover his biological origins intensified. She loved her family deeply, but the desire to know where she really came from grew within her. One night, while they were in the living room watching a family movie, Clara, visibly nervous, finally broached the subject she had been holding back for a long time. "Mom, Dad, do you know anything about my biological parents?" The question struck Marcos and Luisa by surprise, but they knew this moment would come. Calmly, Luisa held her daughter's hand and said, "We always wanted you to be ready to ask questions, and now that you are, let's look for the answers together." That night, Clara's parents explained how little they knew about her adoption. All they had were some court documents and the name of a shelter where Clara had been left shortly after birth. Marcos and Luisa had decided, from the beginning, that the most important thing was to create an environment of love and stability for Clara, without pressuring her with details about her origins. But now, with Clara's question on the agenda, they realized that searching for her roots was part of her growth and self-understanding. With the support of parents and Jorge, Clara began her search. The shelter where she was left still existed, and they decided to pay a visit. When they arrived at the location, they were greeted by Dona Eva, a kind lady who had run the shelter for decades. Eva remembered Clara's case. "You were left at the door of the shelter by a woman who didn't want to identify herself," said Dona Eva. "It was a painful decision, but she seemed sure it was what was best for you." Eva's words deeply moved Clara, who, although she had always felt the love of her adoptive parents, was now beginning to understand the complexity of her story. The conversation with Dona Eva brought more questions than answers, but it also rekindled in Clara a feeling of connection with the past that she had never experienced before. Eva, despite not having much information about the woman who left Clara at the shelter, mentioned something that caught attention. The woman, when leaving her, had murmured a few words about protection and family secrets. This intrigued Clara and her parents, but, in the absence of further details, they left the shelter with the promise to continue searching. What did the woman mean by family secrets? Could it be a sign of something bigger? In the following days, Clara immersed herself in reflections about what it meant to be part of two stories. On the one hand, there was the family who raised her, who gave her love and security. On the other, there was a mysterious past that she still couldn't decipher. Marcos and Luisa, always attentive to Clara's emotions, assured her that, regardless of what she discovered, she would always be an integral part of the family. "Our history with you is what matters, but we will support you in finding your answers," Marcos said. Clara was grateful to have parents who understood her and respected her desire to explore her roots. Despite her parents' support, Clara couldn't stop thinking about the family secrets mentioned by Dona Eva. Curiosity took over her, and she began to research more about the time of her birth, hoping to find some clue. The process was slow and frustrating, but Clara didn't give up. She knew that, somewhere, the answers she sought were waiting to be discovered. Although her search was not easy, Clara began to realize that by exploring her roots, she was further strengthening her own identity. This process of self-discovery made her feel more connected to herself and the world. One day, during one of her investigations, Clara found something that would completely change her perception of her origins. She had decided to visit an old public archive, where she hoped to find birth records or clues about her biological family. After hours of research, a document caught his attention. It was the record of a woman named Helena, which coincided with the period of his birth. The document didn't say much, but a small note in the margin mentioned something about a rare illness in the family. Urged, Clara took the information home and shared it with her parents, who agreed that it deserved deeper investigation. Marcos, with his practical and analytical way, decided to consult a doctor friend to better understand what the note about the rare disease could mean. After some conversations, they discovered that it was a genetic condition that exclusively affected certain family lines. This awakened a new concern in Clara. "What if this rare disease is part of my genetic heritage?" she asked. Fear of the unknown began to mix with curiosity about his past. To alleviate her daughter's concerns, Luisa suggested that Clara take a genetic test, both for her health and to try to find out more about her ancestry. The test was done, and the results brought a shocking revelation. Clara, contrary to what everyone believed, was not completely of European descent. The examination revealed that a good part of his DNA came from African ancestors. This partly explained the presence of the rare disease in the family history, as it was more common in people of African origin. The discovery left Clara in a state of shock. How could she, a white girl with light eyes, have African ancestors? The news was a blow, but it also brought a feeling of accomplishment. Her story was much more complex than she had ever imagined. When sharing the results with her parents, Clara saw the surprise on Marcos and Luisa's faces. The revelation not only explained part of the mystery of her origin, but also established an unexpected connection between Clara and her adoptive parents. "You were always part of us," said Luisa, moved. "But now we know this is even truer than we could have imagined." Clara, who had always felt different from the rest of the family because of her skin color, now understood that, in a way, her roots were intertwined with those of Marcos and Luisa. This discovery brought the family even closer together. Clara, who had always struggled with questions of identity, began to see life from a new perspective. Not only did she belong to a family that loved her unconditionally, but she also shared with them an ancestry that defied outward appearances. The bond she had always felt with her parents now made even more sense. From that moment on, Clara began to embrace her identity with renewed confidence, knowing that her story was as rich and diverse as the story of her adoptive family. Over the next few months, Clara decided to learn more about her African heritage revealed by genetic testing. With the help of Marcos and Luisa, she began to study the history of the African continent, the cultural contributions and challenges faced by people of African descent. The journey of self-discovery turned into something bigger, an opportunity for Clara to honor roots she didn't even know she had. More than ever, she understood that her identity was a tapestry woven by different cultures, and this made her feel more connected to the world and her family. With the new discoveries about her heritage, Clara started to see her life and her place in the world differently. The girl who previously felt out of place, both because of the color of her skin and the constant questions about her origins, now had a much deeper understanding of who she really was. At age 15, Clara began to express herself more confidently at school and in her community. She was no longer afraid to talk about her adoption and proudly shared her story with friends and teachers. "My family is a mix of love and diversity," she said firmly. However, not everyone around Clara understood the complexity of her story. Some people still made insensitive comments, suggesting she didn't fit in with her own family. But Clara, with the unwavering support of Jorge, now 18, and her parents, has learned not to let these observations get her down. "People won't always understand," Jorge said, "but what matters is that you know who you are and where you came from." These words served as a constant reminder to Clara that her true strength came from the love her family shared, not external approval. Once, during a school lecture on cultural diversity, Clara was invited to share her personal experience. With a mix of nervousness and pride, she took the stage and told her story: adoption, the challenges of being a white girl in a black family, and the surprising discovery of her African ancestry. The public's reaction was moving. Many students and teachers approached Clara afterwards, impressed by her courage and inspired by her journey. "You showed us what identity means," said an emotional teacher. For Clara, that moment was an important milestone in her life, as she felt that her story not only defined her, but also had the power to touch the lives of others. As time went by, Clara began to get involved in activities aimed at celebrating racial and cultural diversity. She and Jorge organized events at the school to discuss issues of racism, inclusion, and identity. The impact was immediate, and Clara stood out as a young leader, a strong voice who defied expectations and broke stereotypes. At home, her parents were proud to see her so comfortable in her own skin, facing the world with a maturity beyond her years. "You inspire us every day," said Luisa in a conversation at the dinner table. "What you have done for yourself is incredible, and we are proud to walk alongside you." But even with all this self-confidence, Clara still had moments of introspection. There were days when she wondered what her life would be like if she had never discovered the truth about her roots. These reflections, however, were not accompanied by regret or sadness, but by gratitude. Gratitude for having a supportive family, for having found answers to her questions, and, most of all, for being able to live her life fully, knowing that her story was unique and valuable. At 16, Clara had already come a long way on her journey of self-discovery, but she knew there was much more to explore. Her story, which had begun so unexpectedly, was now a narrative of strength, resilience, and pride. When looking to the future, Clara was ready to face any challenge, knowing that she had a family by her side who loved and supported her unconditionally. She also knew that no matter the circumstances, her identity was something she had built herself, piece by piece, and that made her stronger than ever. Despite his newfound confidence and his family's unconditional support, Clara still faced both external and internal challenges as he approached adulthood. Although she was increasingly comfortable with her identity, the world around her still insisted on placing her in predefined boxes. At a meeting of parents and students at school, Clara realized that some people still viewed her family situation with suspicion. One of the mothers, not wanting to be overtly rude, asked Luisa, "How do you deal with a daughter who is so different?" The comment was full of condescension, and Luisa, without losing her composure, replied firmly, "I raise her with the same love that you raise your children." These situations, although increasingly rare, still made Clara reflect on the world in which she lived. Racial discrimination, in a more subtle form, continued to be a factor present in society. Clara often felt that her adoption was seen as something exotic or out of the ordinary, something that people tried to rationalize rather than simply accept. At school, although she had many friends, there were times when she realized that her life story was the subject of gossip. These moments of judgment hurt her, but they also strengthened her. Clara knew she was growing up in a world that still needed to evolve a lot in terms of empathy and acceptance. At the same time, Clara was also dealing with internal challenges. Although she had accepted her African heritage and celebrated her roots with her family, there was a part of her that still felt torn between two worlds. She was, at the same time, the daughter of black parents and biologically connected to white and African ancestors. The weight of this duality sometimes left her feeling insecure, as if she didn't know exactly where she fit in. "I feel like I belong to two places, but at the same time nowhere," confessed the Jorge one afternoon while walking through the park. Jorge, always her confidant, smiled and said, "You belong where you are loved, Clara, and that has never changed." These moments of doubt made Clara dive even deeper into her journey of self-discovery. She began reading books about racial identity, African history, and even the complex dynamics of transracial adoption. Each new piece of knowledge she gained helped her process her own emotions and understand that the complexity of her identity was not a weakness, but a strength. She began to see her life as an opportunity to transcend labels, to show the world that the boundaries people place between races and cultures didn't have to define who she was. Marcos and Luisa were also essential in helping her navigate these challenges. They, as parents, knew that Clara would face unique difficulties as a white girl raised by a black family, but they always made sure that she felt safe and loved. "I know the world can be confusing," Marcos said in serious conversation, "but you have the right to create your own identity, Clara. Don't let other people's expectations limit you." These words resonated deeply with her. Clara knew her journey was complex, but she also knew she had the emotional tools and support to move forward, regardless of outside opinions. Internally, Clara also began to work on something fundamental: full acceptance of all parts of her heritage. While initially the focus was on her connection to African history, Clara understood that there was also beauty in her European ancestry. She began to see her life as a bridge between cultures, not a divide. Upon recognizing this, Clara felt more complete. He didn't have to choose between one part of himself and another. She could be both, and it freed her from many of the insecurities she previously carried. From that moment on, Clara realized that accepting the complexity of her own story was the key to living fully. As Clara approached her final teenage years, the bonds between her and her family grew even stronger. Jorge, now in college, continued to be a great ally and protector. Even though he lived away from home, he was in constant contact with Clara, offering advice and listening to her concerns. "You'll always be my little sister," he said lovingly. Clara was inspired by Jorge, who always faced life's challenges with a practical mindset and an unshakable confidence in his identity. By seeing him prosper, Clara gained more confidence in her own journey. At home, Clara spent more time with Marcos and Luisa, discussing issues that went beyond their identity and touched on broader issues, such as structural racism, cultural diversity, and the difficulties faced by minorities. Luisa, being a defender of racial equality, frequently participated in debates in the community on these topics, and Clara began to accompany her at these events. Seeing her mother fight for the rights of marginalized people inspired Clara to think about how she could use her own voice to bring about change. From then on, Clara began to get involved in community projects, helping to organize lectures and cultural activities that celebrated diversity. The relationship between Clara and her parents also strengthened in another aspect: open communication. Since Clara expressed her curiosity about her biological origin, Marcos and Luisa had a constant dialogue about what she felt. This helped Clara not feel alone in her search for answers. She knew that no matter what she discovered, Her family would be there to support her. "Family is not just blood, it's love," said Louisa. "And that we always had in spades." These conversations, as simple as they were a constant reminder that Clara had a home where she was completely accepted. Throughout this process, Clara also began to realize the positive impact her story was having on other people. Some of her friends, who were previously not very aware of racial issues, began seeking more knowledge after hearing her story. Clara became a kind of bridge between different cultures, helping people understand that love and family connection transcend skin color. On several occasions, she organized conversations at school to discuss adoption, race, and identity, encouraging her classmates to reflect on how they addressed these issues in their own lives. In the most intimate moments, the family came together to discuss not only the challenges, but also the daily victories. Conversations around the dinner table were filled with laughter, intellectual discussions, and, at times, emotional outbursts. Marcos and Luisa made sure that the house was a place where Clara could express her feelings without fear of judgment. This created an environment of trust and acceptance that allowed Clara to flourish emotionally. She knew that no matter what the outside world thought, her home was a place of unconditional love. Clara also began to notice that the more she connected with her own story, the more she was able to strengthen connections with those around her. By fully accepting her identity and embracing all parts of her heritage, Clara began to create deeper bonds not only with her family, but also with her community. The insecurities that once tormented her now seemed distant. She saw herself as someone capable of navigating between different worlds, learning and growing from each experience. And with her parents' support, she knew she was on the right path to becoming the person she always wanted to be. At the beginning of her senior year of high school, Clara received unexpected news that brought back questions about her biological origins. During a school event, she was approached by a middle-aged woman named Helena, who seemed nervous as she approached. "You're Clara, aren't you?" asked the woman with a look of recognition. Clara confirmed, and Helena then revealed something surprising. "I'm your biological aunt." Clara's world seemed to stop for a moment. She knew this was a possibility, but she had never imagined that she would be confronted with a member of her biological family in such a direct way. Helena explained that she found out about Clara's existence years ago, but hadn't had the courage to look for her. She said that her sister, Clara's biological mother, had left the girl at the shelter because she was in a desperate situation, with no resources to care for a baby. "My sister never forgot you," said Helena, her eyes full of tears. "She always wanted to know if you were okay, but she thought that looking for you would only complicate her life." Helena gave Clara a handwritten letter from her biological mother, in which she explained the reasons behind her painful decision. Clara's mind was full of questions, but at the same time, she felt a sense of peace knowing that her biological mother had not abandoned her because of a lack of love, but because of difficult circumstances. Upon reading the letter, Clara realized how complicated it had been for her mother to make the decision to leave her. The pain of separation was clear in every word. "I wanted to give you the world," the letter said, "but I didn't even have enough to support myself." Clara, although emotional, knew that her life took the right direction when she was adopted by Marcos and Luisa, but now she understood the depth of her biological mother's sacrifice. Clara talked to her adoptive parents about the meeting and the letter. Marcos and Luisa, always understanding, supported her in any decision she made in relation to this new information. "You have the right to know your full story," said Luisa, hugging her. Clara decided that she wanted to get to know Helena better and, eventually, her biological mother, if she was willing. Although her loyalty and love for her adoptive family were never questioned, Clara felt this reconnection was part of her journey of self-discovery. Upon meeting Helena again, Clara was greeted with more stories about her biological family. She discovered that, in addition to her mother, there were other relatives who would be interested in meeting her. This excited her and made her nervous at the same time. Clara always knew her adoption was the best thing that could have happened. But now, the opportunity to learn another part of her story felt like a blessing. She was ready to face whatever came, knowing that she had the unconditional support of Marcos, Luisa, and Jorge. The meeting with Helena was a turning point in Clara's life. As she learned more about her origins, she realized that she didn't need to choose between her families. She could be part of both worlds, and that made her even stronger. Clara was finally at peace with every part of her identity, and knew that no matter what happened, she would always be the same person. A strong, resilient young woman and deeply loved by everyone around her. After the emotional reunion with Helena, Clara began to familiarize herself with a new part of her story, her biological family. Although she was raised in a loving environment with Marcos, Luisa, and Jorge, she now saw the opportunity to learn about her biological roots as enriching, not threatening. Clara felt part of two different stories, and, over time, she realized that she didn't need to choose between one or the other. For her, it was possible to build bridges between these two worlds that shaped her in different but equally important ways. The weeks that followed the reunion were full of exciting encounters. Clara visited Helena several times, meeting other members of his biological family. She felt welcomed, but there was still a mix of complex feelings when meeting her uncles and cousins for the first time. In many of these visits, Clara heard stories about her biological mother, who, according to Helena, always carried the burden of the decision to give her up for adoption. Clara knew that her biological mother was still alive, but Helena explained that she needed time to prepare herself emotionally before reuniting with the daughter she had lost. Meanwhile, at home, Marcos and Luisa continued to support Clara unconditionally. They encouraged her to explore her history and establish a healthy bond with her birth family. Clara, in turn, always made sure to keep her adoptive parents involved in everything that was going on. She wanted them to know that even though she was discovering more about her past, her loyalty and love for them would never change. This created a harmonious balance between the two families, where Clara was able to share meaningful moments with both. One of Clara's challenges during this time was learning to navigate the emotional complexity of being connected to two families. While her biological family saw her as someone they wanted to embrace and get to know better, her adoptive family had already built years of memories and deep bonds. Clara felt that, at times, she was being pulled in two different directions, but she always returned to her advice, Jorge, which reminded her that she didn't need to share her love and loyalty. "You can be the daughter of both families, Clara. You don't have to choose, just let things unfold naturally," he said. Despite these complexities, Clara began to see encounters with her biological family as an opportunity for growth. She came to understand that her story was not fragmented, but multifaceted. Every part of her life, from her upbringing with Marcos and Luisa to her recent reconnection with Helena and the rest of her biological family, contributed to who she was. In a conversation with her adoptive mother, Clara confessed that she was afraid of being too much for her two families. Luisa, always wise, replied, "You will never be too much, Clara. You are the link that unites us. And, believe me, we are all lucky to have you in our lives." As time passed, Clara realized that the two families, although different, had something in common: their love for her. Her biological mother, although still hesitant, wrote letters to Clara through Helena, expressing how happy she was to know that her daughter had grown up in a loving and safe environment. For Clara, these letters were precious. Every word written by the biological mother helped her better understand the motivations behind such a painful and difficult decision. Clara knew that, deep down, her biological mother always wanted the best for her, and that reassured her. Finally, after months of letters and emotional conversations, the moment Clara had been waiting for so long arrived: meeting her biological mother. Nervousness was present, but Clara felt she was ready. Marcos and Luisa accompanied her to the meeting place, offering emotional support and assuring her that, regardless of what happened, she would never be alone. Upon entering the place and seeing her biological mother for the first time, Clara felt a wave of emotions that were difficult to describe. The woman in front of her looked just as vulnerable as she did, and in that moment, they both knew they were ready to finally fill the void left by the past. The moment when Clara and his biological mother, Renata, they finally met was surrounded by emotion and a gentle tension that was soon dissipated by the hug between the two. Renata, visibly moved, held Clara's hands while tears ran down her face. "I've waited so long for this," said Renata, her voice breaking. I never stopped thinking about you. Every day of my life. The words deeply touched Clara's heart, who, although nervous, felt an immediate connection with the woman who, until then, she had only known through letters and stories told by her friends. Helena. The first conversations between the two were a mix of nostalgia, regret, and hope. Renata explained in detail the difficulties she faced as a young woman, without the resources to raise a daughter, and how the decision to give her up for adoption had been, for her, as much an act of desperation as of love. I knew I couldn't offer you the life you deserved, said Renata, wiping away tears. But I never stopped praying that you would find a family that could love you the way I never could. Clara, hearing these words, felt a weight lifted from her shoulders. The story of her adoption, which previously seemed shrouded in mystery and abandonment, now made sense as a gesture of protection. Renata asked about Clara's life with Marcos and Luisa, and Clara talked about her loving upbringing, her experiences growing up, and the discovery of her African ancestry, which unexpectedly connected her to her adoptive parents. Renata was visibly relieved to learn that her daughter had been welcomed by such a loving family. I always wanted to know if I made the right choice, said Renata, sighing. Now I know I did. Clara also shared about her relationship with Jorge, about how her brother was always her protector and advisor, which made Renata smile. He seems like the brother I always wanted you to have, she said. As the hours passed, the initial tension between mother and daughter transformed into something softer, as if they both knew that this meeting was just the first step on a journey of reconnection. Clara knew that it would not be easy to integrate this new figure into her already established life, but at the same time she felt an openness to accepting Renata in her present. I'm not here to change your life, Renata said sincerely. I'm here because I want you to know that I've always been your mother, even from a distance. And if you allow me, I'd like to be part of your life, wherever you think I should be. Clara, with tears in her eyes, replied that she understood and that, although she was still processing many things, she was open to exploring this new relationship with Renata. For her, the love of Marcos and Luisa, it was unchanging, but now there was space to learn more about the woman who brought her into the world. Clara felt like her story was expanding in ways she had never imagined. Renata's presence in her life did not diminish the love she had for her adoptive family. On the contrary, it strengthened the idea that love can exist in different forms and in different contexts. After their first meeting, Clara and Renata began to meet regularly. Little by little, Clara learned more about her biological mother's life and her own challenges. They shared stories and memories, building a new type of bond. Marcos and Luisa, although they did not participate directly in these meetings, continued to be Clara's fundamental support. They encouraged her to reconnect with her biological history and always reminded her that their love for her was unconditional. This gave Clara the strength she needed to face any insecurity that might arise during this process of reconciliation with her past. However, the reunion with Renata brought new emotional challenges for Clara. She now found herself torn between two love stories, that of her adoptive family and that of her biological mother. There were moments when Clara felt guilty about spending time with Renata, as if this somehow diminished her love for Marcos and Luisa. But over time, she realized that these two stories were not conflicting. Both were part of who she was, and she could love both of her families in different but equally deep ways. By accepting this reality, Clara found a peace she had never experienced before. As time passed, Clara began to integrate Renata into her life in a more organic way. She introduced her to close friends, and even to Jorge, who had always been a central figure in her life. Jorge, as expected, welcomed Renata with empathy and understanding, knowing how much this meeting meant to Clara. The reunion with her biological mother gave Clara a new perspective on love, forgiveness, and the ability to move forward. Now, with the pieces of her past finally pieced together, Clara felt like she was ready for the next chapter of her life. After many exciting encounters and important revelations, Clara has finally reached a point of full acceptance of his identity. She understood that her story was a rich and complex tapestry, woven by two different but equally important families. At 18, Clara was preparing to leave high school and begin university life, with a clear vision of who she was and what she wanted to do. She was interested in social justice issues, especially those related to adoption, race, and identity. Her personal journey inspired her to pursue a career where she could help other children and teens facing similar issues as hers. The relationship between Clara and Renata, his biological mother, continued to grow stronger over time. They did not live together on a daily basis, but they met regularly and spoke on the phone frequently. Renata respected the space that Clara still needed to process everything, and Clara, in turn, felt free to move forward at the pace she considered appropriate. This balance made the connection between the two healthy without pressure. Clara always knew that Renata had a special place in her life, but that place would never diminish her role. Marcos, Luisa, and Jorge. Upon entering university, Clara felt more sure of herself than ever. She knew that in many ways her life had been marked by exceptional circumstances: transracial adoption, discovering her African roots, reuniting with her birth mother. But at the same time, she knew that these experiences prepared her for being an important voice in debates about identity and acceptance. At university, Clara became involved in groups that discussed the intersection of race and adoption, sharing her story and listening to the stories of other young people who were also dealing with issues of belonging. During this period, Clara also began to understand the importance of passing on her story to future generations. She dedicated herself to writing a diary where she recorded all the ups and downs of her journey. This diary would become a source of reflection for her in the future, but also a legacy that she would like to leave for other people who could benefit from her experience. "My story is about love, in its many forms," she wrote, "and about how love can transcend barriers, labels, and expectations, as long as there is courage and acceptance." The acceptance that Clara found over the years was manifested in her way of dealing with the world around her. She no longer worried about the curious looks or insensitive comments that occasionally surfaced about her adoption. On the contrary, Clara used these situations as opportunities to educate others. "My family is different, yes," she said proudly, "but it's exactly this difference that makes us so strong and unique." By fully embracing her own story, Clara has found new strength to inspire others to do the same. At age 21, Clara organized a talk at university about transracial adoption, where she shared her personal experience and discussed the emotional and social complexities that this type of adoption can bring. Marcos and Luisa were in the audience, moved and proud to see their daughter speak with so much confidence about her own journey. Renata also attended the lecture, and at the end, the two exchanged a silent hug, which said more than any words. Clara knew that no matter what, she had been surrounded by love, and it shaped her into who she was. Now, Clara saw her life as a cycle that was completed. She had two families, two worlds, and both contributed to the person she became. Although the journey was full of challenges, tears, and discoveries, she knew every step was worth it. Clara, after all, didn't just belong to one side or the other. She belonged to both. And with this total acceptance of her identity, she was ready to continue her life with purpose, hope, and, above all, love, the love that had always guided her and that, deep down, was the force that kept everything in balance.